Welcome to the Grinders Table, the podcast where we sit with C-suite executives and founders who are taking their industry by storm to figure out how you can build an exceptional career and business. Together, we'll try to uncover how they are both defying the odds and what you can learn from their experience.
I guess today saw opportunities where others saw chaos. She saw a chance to reimagine her role as an educator and rebuild her country, Tunisia, through entrepreneurship. Now she's creating bridges across Africa, helping young entrepreneurs see beyond their borders while convincing global investors to look more at African innovation. Dr. Houda Ghazzi, welcome to the Grinders Table. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you, UM. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, I always struggle introducing people, so I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself in your words. Who is Dr. Huda?
So, I mean, not always amazing to talk about oneself, but I would say I'm initially someone coming from the field of science and academia. So I was a professor of strategy in another life. I've been teaching for almost 20 years, and I would never thought I'd end up in this trajectory. And when the revolution started in Tunisia, I think it was at the same time a moment of uncertainty, but also a moment where you really feel that you can unleash your potential. And I've been extremely passionate about social innovation to start. I was really looking at these innovators, those change makers who decided that there was no curse, that problems could be solved, and specifically the ones who were able to build technologies that helped to solve those very annoying daily problems that we're facing here on the continent. So it started that way, and ever since, it's been 10 years that I have the chance to be able to do my best to impact change makers, to manage teams, to build great relationships with partners, to try to influence policies and work with governments. So I've been having the chance to work at different layers, I would say, really micro with the entrepreneurs, but then also with the ones who support entrepreneurs and with governments. And I think that having this multi-layer perspective is something that passionates me because I'm really driven by transformation and development.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You were a professor again. Now I think about your career trajectory. You ended up in an unlikely position. Now, did you ever think that you would be in this role? Was there any indicator?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I never dreamt of being a CEO, to be honest, and it's not even my dream job. What I like about the job is the impact part of it, and I would also see the hope. I'm really someone who loves optimistic, positive vibes, and I think that I kind of ended up here because I had to more than I really wanted to. It was more like a personal drive. It's not easy for CEOs, and I'm like often see people who are like, oh wow, I want to be a CEO. For me, it's really sometimes I look at my teams and I'm like, I'd love to be the community person, or I'd love to be the program manager, or I'd love to be the impact person. So I think, yes, it's an unlikely position, but at the same time, I'm not too surprised when looking at it now when I'm 46 with more maturity. I think that oftentimes we unconsciously drive our careers in a way that we think is random and serendipity, but in reality is driven by an unconscious passion that each one of us has and that ends up driving him or her.
Yeah. So very, very, very true. I've listened to one of your interviews and you mentioned something that caught my attention. You mentioned that hope, skills, and exposure create the foundation for youth development and even development anywhere. Can you explain how these three elements work together as you've built your organization, Open Startup, or even built any of your programs?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think I'll gonna walk you through a bit here the chance that I consider that I've had in my life, which was being an African who was very early on exposed to, with my family, we lived in London, and then I had the chance to do my PhD in Paris. So automatically, I think that it kind of programmed me to have a perspective on countries and people that was automatically open. And I think that oftentimes we don't realize that what blocks us and the main hurdles are psychological ones, And I'll give you one example. I don't know if it's going to relate, but when I went to Kuwait the first time in my life, I remember the smell of amber and the difference and the way people were dressed made me feel that I wasn't home. It took me 3 months, and after that, I realized that I felt home. And so I was able to work as a consultant at my full capacity. So I do think that we underestimate the importance and the power of the psychological comfort that comes from exposure. The more you go from a country to another, that first time and the 10th time, you're not the same person and you don't navigate systems the same way. If you equip yourself with directions, your engine navigates better. So that's why exposure to me is more important. And then when you're exposed, education helps. Education is the key to all doors. If you have a bit of exposure and self-confidence, I would say. And finally, hope. Nothing works without it. We are all here driven by hopeful and wishful thoughts, hoping for better lives, aspiring for having amazing people around us, having a good health, seeing our countries thrive, seeing people that we love around us do good. So I think that as human beings, if you equip them with a heartbeat, which is the hope part, and then you give them the brain, which is the education part, and then the exposure, which is kind of the soul, then usually you succeed.
Oh, so well, beautifully put. I never really, thought of it that way, but thank you for using that analogy. Over the last few years, I've spent time in the Moroccan ecosystem. I actually just got back from Morocco some weeks ago. Spent time in Rwanda, spent time in Egypt. Each of these ecosystem has some sort of vision that they want to evolve to be. But when you look at Africa wide, there is no centralized vision for the continent.
Mhm.
And what do you think about that? How can we solve for that? Because it just feels like everybody's building in their own silos.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to give you there an analogy. Oftentimes, the easy answer, which is Africa is a mosaic of 54 countries, don't think you can understand it as a whole, which is totally true. But I don't think that Schuman, after World War II, was thinking the same when building the European Union. European Union is an incredible patchwork of countries that have nothing in common. The language, the religion, the geographies, the markets, yet they managed to create that market. And that market protected Europe, gave it a negotiation power, gave it peace, understanding, a human exchange, intellectual property exchange, data exchange that was regulated in ways that allowed for the system to grow. Africa should not aim to work together because there are communalities or similarities. Absolutely not. I mean, United States, whether you go to Miami or to Texas or DC, I mean, you're not dealing with the same type of persona. So I think that if we want to battle for this communality, it is not the right battle. The real one is how can we tell the story of prosperity in a way that looks alike? And we can start with very simple things, which is talent mobility. How are we going to manage data privacy together? How can we go and negotiate with those big infrastructure players so that we don't negotiate country by country? So it is more how can we smartly choose some battles where Africa can stand united to better negotiate and position.
Very true. And I think that there is a demographic of people will be very pivotal in this conversation. And this is those that have been exposed. So the diaspora, they've gone, around Europe, the US, they've been exposed to how ecosystems can evolve and be quite good across different markets. And I believe that they hold the key to how we can achieve this commonality across. But when you think about the diaspora, how do you think they fit towards us transforming the continent?
Put a more provocative and probably disappointing perspective there. I think that the diaspora concept we never cracked the code. And if you look at it, like there are very few diasporas, like the Lebanese one, for instance, that are extremely well organized. If you try to look at like the way the diaspora functions in Tunisia, for instance, I would say it is very contextual. After the revolution, it was motivated. Today, it's angry at its country. And a diaspora that's angry at its country is worse than anything else. I understand it, but at the same time, you should never knock on its door because it's not gonna help. Diasporas are really a beast that doesn't behave the way you think it's gonna behave necessarily. It is far from its country, aspiring or not to come back. It's angry or it loves the country. But one sure thing, models where we say diaspora is gonna invest don't work. Because oftentimes we don't see a lot of diaspora's work. We see a lot of fluffiness, a lot of projects that are like diaspora, but concretely, who ends up investing? If you don't have access to the right information, if you don't have the right partners, if you don't trust the system where you're investing, I don't think we're likely to see the diaspora do something. I think we are better off equipping the locals to invest in the countries where they are evolving to start. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, I don't want to offer like a generic answer, but I think that I am not that optimistic. I think that diasporas there's a lot of work to be done to really get close to the diaspora and genuinely understand how and under what conditions the diaspora will invest in the country.
True, true. What you say that is true for the Tunisian diaspora, I can tell you that it's almost the same thing across board. The same in Nigeria, it's the same in Uganda. It's almost the same thing, the diaspora looking back home and just sort of being angry at where the countries are. So you're absolutely correct. And it's a problem that we have to solve because I think that is a beast that we need to tame and we can use to develop the continent to the level that we think we should be. You talk about entrepreneurship as being a common language, and it's actually very true. From Nigeria to Tunisia to Egypt, when it gets down to doing business, people understand, right? And it sort of sometimes overcomes, cultural, political, and economic differences. Sometimes because Africa is very diverse, and sometimes doing business across borders can be very difficult. How do you think we can ensure that this common language, which is entrepreneurship, becomes very I'm looking for a better word for this, cross-pollinated across the continent? How do we ensure that a Nigerian will be very comfortable doing business with a Tunisian? A Tunisian will be very comfortable doing business with somebody from Rwanda.
Yeah. That's my favorite part, actually. And that's the one I'm extremely positive on this one. And I'm positive because I do see it happen all the time. I mean, OST, like 5 years ago, it's been 9 years that we operate. And 5 years ago, we decided to pick that challenge, which is being a strongly Pan-African organization supporting 200 African entrepreneurs all across almost 19 countries, I would say. And it works. So I'm not putting any assumption there. I am very boldly telling you that the way it works is simple. Put people together, give a joint interest, find ways so that the teams can mix up somehow, get them to travel from a country to another, make them feel home in the country where they go. I think that there's something that we're forgetting is that Africans are kind of traumatized by their rejection. They've been rejected for visas for a very long time. And today, for the very first time, their continent is compelling. That is the go-to continent where everyone thinks that the next growth is happening. So it is amazing to finally be welcomed back home. And I do think that this is a unique opportunity for the continent to welcome its children coming from different neighbors. And I do think that if we are seeing, and that's what we hope is going to happen, is more mergers and acquisition. There's a lot of fragmented industries today, startups with small size that are all struggling when it comes to scaling. And we do think that mergers and acquisition might be one of the ways to see a lot of cross-country collaboration. The digital working online helps, internships help. We also think that the existence today of investors that have mandates across Africa will help, because investors are doing that extraordinary work of understanding data, understanding competition across country, pushing startups to see what other competitors are doing and helping them to see if there are ways to collaborate. So it's a very optimistic, I would say, holistic model where actors like us, OST, who are accelerating startups across Africa, actors like Go My Code, who are preparing talent from across Africa, actors like Africanvest, who are investing across Africa, but so many others, and amazing VC funds that we are seeing, like Rita Znieber in Morocco with Kalis Outliers, and not to mention only those two ones, but like there is today a momentum that seems to be a very structural trend that will create a connected Africa.
I actually agree with you on this. Over the last 10 plus years, I've seen venture evolve with more collaboration between, the partners at different funds and trying to enable their businesses scale to other markets. But let's talk about OST. What was the original vision for OST and how has that vision evolved over the years?
Yes. So when we started, our vision was very simple. We were looking at the Columbia University competition. We're like, wow, this is so cool. How can we do something similar in Tunisia? And the vision was to get the youth of the country to wake up. And the name Open was openness across discipline, openness to the industry, and openness to the international. So we teamed up with Africanvest, with the US Embassy at that time, with Fondation Biat, biggest bank in the country at that time, and others to start. And then from there, I would say the big vision, and I would say what keeps us going has always been one thing: the development of the continent and the role of youth, because we don't want our youth to reach their retirement cycle without being part of the active society. That would be the drama for us. If Africa goes to getting our young people to become old without having worked, we're going to have a double trouble. So what happened was that this vision then transformed. We started in Tunisia, and then we were like, oh, wow, what about we try to integrate Morocco and Senegal? And then it was like, oh, wow, what about we try to have everyone able to join? And then we were like, and I think that's where I'm very happy that we pioneered there, was why do we leave the scientists aside? And because somehow I think I went back home, being a scientist, I was like, how can I get my peers to do the same leap of faith? How can we get scientists to build solutions that are technological, that could really bring amazing opportunities to solve problems locally? And with MIT Africa and MIT Sloan partnered, including so many partners who came and joined us. So Sanofi joined us, and then Digital Africa joined us, and then IFC at one point, and then Stellenbosch. And then the idea, and here I'm sure I'm going to have troubles because we have more than like 30 partners so far, but we really felt that there is an incredible potential today, for instance, in the deep tech space. And I think that the vision for OST in the upcoming 5 years, at least, is to be the boldest partner there. We want to be the Y-Combinators of deep tech, and we want to make sure that any scientist that has an incredible idea can come to us, and over a year, we'll get them to be ready to fundraise. And I think right now I'm happy to announce that, for instance, over the last year, 70% of the startups we accompanied were able to fundraise. We even have a startup called Remedy that fundraised around 3 million with a 15 million valuation, more or less. So it's not a dream. It is happening, and it's not happening because it's a miracle. It's happening because there is a need, and there are ways to build programs that have a good product market fit.
And in a way, we are beginning to see the results of all this work that's been done. And one of the biggest African exits happened from Tunisia, InstaDeep.
Yes.
When that happened, was that a validation of that vision for you?
I think that the validation is, we don't need an exit to have a validation. I know that this is what the VCs say all the time. I think the validation is when you start to see a big number of people who want to try, and more initiatives that start to generate revenues and that try to structure and start to grow. That's already a validation, because it is important to create the ecosystem. The exits are, of course, the cherry on the cake. The validation was also, I would say, an Expensia with 100 million. Was a Go My Code that was able to fundraise. So I just want to be a bit more continent specific. I think it's important to be patient there. If we start saying that validation is just exits, and this is often what we hear, like going to the US, and I just want to say, like, be patient. The continent is a child doing the first steps. How do you validate your kid? You validate your kid when they start walking better and then when they start running slowly. So I think, yeah, probably this is me being a professor, but I love to think that we have to be a bit more patient with us.
I absolutely agree with you. But how do you then answer that question where, and this is a question I get quite a lot. Let me even paraphrase from a conversation I had with a PE firm, somebody in a PE firm. He said, over the last 10 years, I've been hearing Africa is the next frontier. When exactly is Africa going to be the next frontier? Because I'm hearing all promises, but I'm not seeing the results.
Yes, I mean, definitely. I think that by next frontier, it also depends on, think about today the opportunity of fintech in Africa. I mean, clearly, huge population. Most of it is not included in the financial sector, while it is the most important sector. I mean, today, even though we did see most of the unicorns come from that space, there is still so much to build. I think that when we look at like the next frontier is also saying what a tremendous market is still there to be served and how many experiments we can still test to see what's the best model before we can exit. So I think that it's also looking at Africa and being very bold about its market, its needs, and its capacity to test at a lower cost many models. So, of course, the end game is to create prosperity and to create profitable businesses and businesses that are inclusive and businesses that are mindful of their environment and of their communities. So I'm just saying why we also need to make sure that we are pushing organizations to be mindful. I don't think that I would love to see Africa just growth oriented. I think this is also an opportunity to build businesses that are impact driven, to build businesses that are conscious of their environment, businesses that are going to be conscious of the mental health of its people, societies that are 21st century societies. So I don't think that the question is Africa the next market? It is already. I'm just saying that we need a bit more time to find ways to make it up for the infrastructure that's not there. And that's, for instance, a tremendous opportunity. There are huge opportunities to leapfrog to make sure that we are building solutions that can really overpass some infrastructure that's not there. And I think that here, if you look at startups like Credit, US Nigerian founder, I mean, he cracked the code.
Yeah.
Is it a market? It is a tremendous market. It is just a bit more difficult to be able to find the right product given the level of infrastructure and given the difficulties sometimes in terms of regulation. The other, I think, challenge is the capacity that these startups will have in their growth, because there's something that we don't talk about, which is oftentimes the market's there, the product is built, but what makes us fail is the human capacity to drive at scale organizations. Do we have in Africa today people that are used to manage thousands of employees? And finally, I think that the other question is, how are we going to use AI? How are we going to manage these organizations using AI? Because that's definitely, I mean, we have to address that elephant in the room. It is not a detail, it is core. How are we going to employ people? Are we continue to employ people? But I don't think that the question today is Africa going to be profitable? It is, if you know how to build the right product market fit.
Mm. Yeah, I love that answer. One of the people I respect in the ecosystem, Oreo says, usually says that you cannot. He has a saying that goes, "You cannot entrepreneur your way out of bad leadership. You cannot entrepreneur your way out of bad policies." Based on your experience working on the Startup Act in Tunisia, what policy frameworks do you believe that African nations, African countries can adapt to accelerate each startup ecosystem?
A very deep believer in liberal models where we give space to test. I personally think that when we don't know, let's not put in place a regulation and test. I think sandboxes are great ways to get operators to be building something under really observation to make sure that if we are to build a regulation, it has to be serving the actor while protecting the governments as well. I think that today, a country that I deeply really respect is Rwanda and the model that they put in place, which is models where regulations are built and destroyed in a heartbeat, where like whenever something comes up, there's a task force that is there to test quickly. And here, what needs to work actually is to create agile task forces that are transversal to ministries and that are supported by a lot of communities so that we clearly understand what they need and then go back quickly to different ministries together to say, how would this impact? How could this serve? How can we build something? Building regulations that are flexible, not necessarily laws, could be the decret, for instance, where you can test things. And finally, I would say what we've seen in the policy space that's been innovative in Tunisia was really the very inclusive task forces, where you would bring people from different horizons who would bring different perspectives. And that way, when you're a policy maker, you're not a persona that's completely disconnected. You need to have policymakers that are coming from the administrative space because we have to respect certain things, but we also need to have those champions, industry champions that are there to remind everyone that governments are there to serve economic and social players.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that you're quite vocal about, even in our conversation today, has been AI. And we're also seeing this also cascade in other ecosystems like Morocco. There's now a really, big deep tech scene there. We're seeing some of it in Egypt. In short, I would say that North Africa is beginning to be quite a, for lack of a better word, a pioneer in that space, AI and deep tech on the continent. How do you think the continent itself, again, this is a very general question, leverage AI to transform each of its ecosystem? Because it's yet to stay. We cannot deny or ignore it, but we can't also say we don't have the resources or the talent to tap into it. So what do we do?
I'd recommend to read a book of Karim Bekir that I salute, who is the CEO of InstaDeep. Amazing, very on point book where he, in a nutshell, explains that AI is precisely the opportunity for Africa. And he makes this amazing thesis around the triptych, including AI, solar energy, and crypto, explaining that it is that triptych that could be that could help for the salvation of Africa somehow. And he really explains that while people say AI and infrastructure is not for Africa, well, infrastructure needs energy, and energy is Africa. It is incredible that today we're negotiating with these huge big tech players, which are amazing, of course, without thinking, okay, how can we build models where infrastructure in Africa can be a great way to decrease the cost of AI? How can we have another narrative that says that Africa has the talent that could help AI thrive all over the place? And finally, I mean, I'm not a specialist on AI. I'm just saying that, and in general, like, I think that it's important not to say that the technology and deep tech in AI are produced in Africa. I mean, it's just saying that Africa needs to be smart enough to use technology as a tool to solve its everyday problems. I think the real point is, what are our everyday problems? How are our users and how are our populations trying to improve? And how can we use technology as only a tool to build solutions that matter? And that's how I want to look at AI. How can we use AI to better educate? How can we use AI to have healthcare systems with supply chains that are more efficient, with access to doctors that is more efficient, with predictive medicine? How can we use AI to have our farmers better feed us? So it's not because it's Africa, it's because it's an urgent need in our continent. And that's why we need technology. So it's not a luxury. It is the only way for the continent to be able to have a decent life.
Absolutely, it is not a luxury. We're running out of time. We're going to jump into rapid fire question. Just simple questions with simple answers. I mean, you can go on to elaborate if you want to. What is the best book that has shaped your thinking?
I think Social Innovation, it's a book that really helped me. I think it's an acumen book that really helped me see that social innovation is the best way to save societies.
What's the most underrated quality in entrepreneurs?
Balance, being balanced.
What is the most overrated startup metric?
Investment, how many funds did you fundraise? Come on, how do you do it?
Sure.
Are you being decent? Do you have values?
Okay. Um, what is one policy change that you think would transform Africa overnight?
The visa mobility, people's mobility.
I feel like clapping because this is so true. Because I recently did an article on LinkedIn that talked about, how we are restricting innovation because of the artificial borders that we've built around ourselves. When we look back 10 years, what is one thing you believe that we missed out on as a continent?
Mm, yeah. It's a very good one. Probably education. Education. Being able to prepare our young people, really readapting the education models.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for answering these questions. You've all been listening to Dr. Houda Ghozzi. Did I pronounce it right?
It's perfect. Thank you.
CEO of OST, which is Open Startup. Before you go, I ask all my guests this particular question rather. Between fame, money, pleasure, what is the most important to you and what is the least important to you? Fame, power, money, and pleasure.
Oh, for me, clearly the fourth one. I wouldn't be an NGO otherwise. Pleasure, of course, because life is short and we are such an insignificant individuals that probably nobody will remember.
And which of them is the least important?
Fame, probably. Fame. Yeah,
I actually
fame.
I've never met an educator that loved fame.
I mean, fame is trouble. Stay home, enjoy your friends, go party.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you so much. This was such a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much.
This has been the Grinders Table podcast, bringing you unfiltered insights from Africa's most compelling founders and business leaders. If you had found value in today's conversations, here's how you can help us amplify these stories. Take 30 seconds to share this episode with someone in your network who's building, investing, or curious about Africa. You'll be amazed at how many life-changing connections start from a single shared conversation. And if you're feeling generous, a quick rating and review goes a long way. It helps more founders and business leaders discover these powerful insights. Until next week, keep grinding.